We're going to be in Job chapter 1 this morning. That's where we're going to start out at. Job chapter 1. I'm going to read verses 1 and 2 of Job chapter 1. It says, "There was a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job, and that man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil. And there were born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters." As we begin to think about this, I wonder in my mind, or as I begin to think, I wondered why God was telling us about Job here, why He was giving us the things of Job. You think about the book of Job and all the things that went on, there's probably a lot of different reasons he started out like that, but the first thing he does here is give us a description of who Job was. It tells us there that where Job was from, he was from the land of Uz, and he was a perfect man. In the Bible, when you think about perfect, it means complete. So I think what God's telling us here about Job is that Job had everything he needed to have a good life. That Job was complete in the things that God had given him. That he was living a life that we would consider having everything that we needed. In this life that we live, in our minds, there's a lot of things that we need to have, right? We feel like we have to have enough money to live comfortably. We feel like we have to have nice things sometimes. We feel like we have to have insurance and things like that in the world that we live now, the days that we live now. For Job here, he had those things. He had money, he had nice things. He was living a life of comfort, so to speak. So I think God had given him everything that he needed to live a good life. It tells us here that Job was an upright man. When you think about an upright man, that just tells us that he wasn't a crooked or a perverse man. That he was a straight arrow. That he done the things that everybody around him expected him to do. That he was moral and lived a life that was pleasing to God in that aspect. God tells us those things. He goes on here and he says that he was one that feared God. You can be a moral and upright man without fearing God. And you see that a lot in the world that we live. But Job here was a moral and upright man, but he feared God. He lived a life that was pleasing to God. He did the things that were necessary for him to live a life that pleased God. If you read down through here, and I'm not going to read all those things, it tells us that the things that he did to be sure that happened. And that was his concern as he went through, because he did sacrifices, and he did sacrifices for his family and things of that nature. He wanted to make sure that everything was where it needed to be when it came to God. He feared God. He wanted to live for God. He goes on here and he tells us that he eschewed evil, which means that he hated evil. He put evil away. He didn't want anything to do with those things. When we first look at Job here, we see a man that's doing everything that he needs to do to live a life that's pleasing to God, don't we? We see a man here that God has blessed because of that. He's blessed him because of that life that he's lived. He's blessed him because of his desire to live a life for him. He tells us there in that second verse that he had a large family. It says he's born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He had 10 children. He had a large family. And they were close-knit. If you read on down through here, it tells that they had banquets and they would all gather together and enjoyed being around each other, enjoyed each other's company. They had a close-knit and loving family that everybody gets along. Wouldn't it be wonderful if everybody in this world had a close-knit and loving family that everybody got along? Well, wouldn't that be wonderful? But it don't happen, does it, in the world that we live? Job was blessed. He was blessed by God because of who he was and the things that he done, his desire to live for God. He was blessed because of those things. It goes on down and it tells us that he had great substance. He was a wealthy man. And it tells us everything that he had. He was blessed beyond measure because of his desire to live for God. So when we first look at this, we see a man who loved God so greatly that he feared of doing something to displease God. And when I think about that statement, that he loved God so greatly, he feared doing something to displease God, I had to instantly look at my life and ask myself, do I live in that same manner? Do I live in a manner to where no matter what it is that I'm doing, no matter where I'm at, no matter the circumstance of life, do I live a life to where I'm feared of doing something that displeases God? I'm afraid for a lot of us that we never think about that. You know, I have to think about my own self, and that's the only one I can answer for. And there's a lot of times when I don't think about fearing God. There's a lot of times when I don't think about those things in my life. Am I displeasing God at this moment in time? Am I doing something that is not a direction that God would have me to go, or living a life that would be displeasing to God? We don't think about that a whole lot. We live in a world where there's so much so many things out there that does displease God, and we're so immune to them, so to speak, we don't even notice them, that I'm afraid that there's a lot of times when we just kind of never even notice it. We never even notice it. You look on down, you think about Job's wife, and I'm afraid that sometimes maybe we're kind of like her, and I jumped ahead. And I wonder what God does when he sees us in that position. And I'm thinking about me again here. I'm wondering if he kind of goes, oh man, there he goes again. I can't believe he done it again. I can't believe he fell into that same trap. I can't believe that he's, you know, I kind of wonder how God thinks whenever he thinks about me, whenever he looks at my life. But Job here was feared to displease God. He wanted to be sure not only he didn't displease God, but that his whole family didn't displease God. He was concerned about those things. And I believe God tells us all this at the beginning of Job so we will know, or not think in our minds, that because of the circumstance that goes on in Job's life, he was being punished. You know, a lot of times we associate those things when we're going through trials or tribulations or troubles in our life. Especially in the Old Testament, they thought if you was having trials or troubles or tribulations, it was because of sin. And you read through Job, and that's kind of what his friends pointed at. Hey, you've done something that you shouldn't have been doing. But there was nothing. I believe God tells us that here in these first few verses, so we won't think that. But there was a test. You know, I don't like thinking about those tests. But in verse 6 of this same chapter, it says, now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. The first verse of chapter 2 says again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. When I read those two verses, the first thing that come into my mind was a question. How often does this happen? How often do these things go on? You know, does God and Satan come together and Satan accuse us on a daily basis? I don't know. Is it a weekly? Is it a monthly? Is it a yearly? Is it just on whatever time frame that God set up? I really don't know. But boy, when I saw that, I instantly thought, oh my, how often am I accused before God for the things that I've done? When we see Satan here as he comes in, he tells God, he says, I've been walking to and fro on the earth. And God asked him, he said, have you thought about my servant Job? Now imagine yourself if you were in earshot of this conversation. Imagine yourself and put your name in there where Job's is. Imagine this conversation in your mind. Satan says, I've been walking to and fro on the earth. And God says, well, have you thought about my servant Job? You thought about my servant Greg or my servant Janet or whoever it may be? Have you thought about my servants? changes outlook when you change the name, doesn't it? Begins to make us kind of stand up and take notice. But the one thing it does is makes us realize we don't like this conversation. I don't like anything about this conversation, just to be honest with you. Other than it's a good example for me and a good learning opportunity, but to think about this conversation, I don't like it. The Lord said to Satan, "Whence comest thou?" And Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil?" Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Doth Job fear God for naught? Has not thou made a hedge about him and about his house, and about all that he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. Put forth thy hand now, and touch all that he hath, and he'll curse thee to thy face." We don't like anything about that conversation, do we? I wouldn't want my name included. But yet there's some times that there's tests come about in our lives, isn't there? There's some times that those things come about. Satan here, as he came before God, God said, "What about Job?" And Satan said, "Hey, I can't touch him. I can't touch him. You build a hedge around him and I can't touch him." You know, a lot of times in my prayers, I ask God to build a hedge around me, to build a hedge around you all, to build a hedge around this church. I ask God to do those things, and I know that God can do that and protect us. The Bible teaches us that right there. The Bible tells us that God had a hedge around Job. Satan couldn't touch him. And we can have the same thing. The only thing here is that we realize is that God's in complete control. No. You know, the thought that God allows suffering to come into our lives is something that we don't want to think about. We wouldn't want to hear our names in this conversation. We wouldn't want to ever be associated with this. But be assured, this conversation was crystal clear to God. Satan didn't trick him. Satan didn't lure him into something to where he'd be able to tempt Job. He didn't do any of those things. At no time during any of this was God out of control. He was in complete and total control during this whole thing. When we face those times in our lives, He's in control. Have you ever sat down and said, "God, why am I going through this? Why are these things happening in my life? Why is this going on?" Have you ever done that? I have. I've said, "God, why is this going on? Why are these things happening? Why did this come about in my life?" You know, I've learned as time's gone on that during those times of testing, God has a plan and a purpose. Now you look at Job's situation here, and the first thing that we think about is there's no possible way that God had a purpose in all this. Because we see the things that happened to Job, and the Bible tells us here that they fell upon all that he had. They took away his camels, they took away his sheep, they took away everything that he had. A tornado come through and blew down the house and killed all of his children. He was left absolutely with nothing. You know, all the props that we think of that we have to have. Remember, we talked about having everything to live a good life. Job had those things, and then in one instant, it was all gone. It was all gone. Everything that he had, all of his properties, his animals, his wealth, gone. His children, gone. Everything that he had to kind of make life good, gone. Think about that. It doesn't make sense to us, does it? Why do we go through suffering? Why do we have children that are born with diseases? Why do we have children that are born with handicaps? Why do we have people that get diseases? Why do we have people that endure great heartache or great loss or whatever it may be? Why do we have those things? Why do we have suffering? We ask that question a lot, don't we? Why have we endured for the past year the things that have gone on in this world? The first thing that we could point to is evil. We could say that because of our evil nature, we've changed the world we live in, and this is where it's all come from. And I guess in some aspect that's right, because you can go back to Genesis and it tells us that God created everything in a certain way and it was all good. I don't think Job had to worry, I don't think Adam had to worry about going through the Garden of Eden and getting poison ivy. I really don't think that would happen. I don't think he had to pluck any weeds, because that happened whenever he got kicked out. All those weeds come about. Those thistles that Levi gets a dime a piece for picking up out of the yard. All those things that come about, I don't think they were there. That suffering, we could say, come about because of our evil. But I think it's got a greater purpose sometimes. I think that purpose is maybe to help us learn to trust God. Learn to lean on God and learn to believe that God is still the God that's in control. We sometimes forget that, don't we? You know, when we face these situations, we've got options. We've got options. We could reject God completely. Walk away and say, God, I can't believe you put me in this position, and I want nothing to do with you. And the truth is, many do. When they find themselves in troubles and trials and hardships and all those different things, they throw their hands up and they say, I'm done. Not doing it anymore. You know, I've heard a lot of jokes and things of that nature about preachers quitting every day after Sunday morning service. On the way home, they say, I'm not doing it again. And their wife nudging them and say, we got service at 5 o'clock or something that afternoon. We got to go back. A lot of times we do that, don't we? We feel like we're suffering. We feel like we're going through a certain trial or a tribulation. We just kind of throw our hands up and say, God, I'm done with you. I just can't do it anymore. A lot of people do that, as I said, and they'll turn to this world trying to find something to ease their pain. And I can assure you, beyond doubt, that this world will reach out and accept them with open arms. It'll reach out and it'll bring them right in, and the next thing you know, the situation is worse than it ever was before. I can assure you this. You know how I know? I've been there. I've done those things. This world will, come on, I can take care of you. The next thing you know, it's a lot worse. Or we could trust the only being in all creation who is never out of control. I don't know, and I hadn't read it all to you. I don't know if you thought about it or have thought about it as you've read through Job. In verse 12 there it says, and the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he hath is in thy power. Only upon himself put not forth thine hand. God puts limitations on those tests. He puts limitations on those things that we go through. You know, we don't know why we go through those things a lot of time. I don't know why Kay is going through the things she's going through. I really don't. I don't know why we have sickness. I don't know why we have those trials and tribulations. I don't know why it can't be found. I don't know why everything says that she's in perfect shape, and yet she's enduring the things that she's going through. But God does. Maybe it's so it increases her faith. Maybe it's so it increases my faith. Maybe it's so it increases your faith. I don't know. Maybe it's because that person that God has to help is not on the scene yet. I don't know the answers, but I know who's in control. Miss Susie gave a praise this morning. First time in 4 years. When it first started, it looked completely out of control, didn't it? No hope. The one that's in control put it back. And we got a praise this morning. 4 years. We like things like that, don't we? We like things to happen. But we don't know. We don't know why. We don't know how long. We don't know when. That's the things that we don't know. But we can be assured that God's in control no matter what those other answers might be. But He's the God that's in control of all evil. He told Satan, hey, you can go this far and that's it. We look in the world we live and we think, man, evil's out of control, isn't it? But I still think God has said this is the limit. Now what's going to happen one of these days is God's going to pull that limit away, and I can't imagine what's going to go on in the world that we live. You can look in Revelations and get a glimpse, but I still can't imagine. But God's in control. He's in control of the sickness. He's in control of the heartache. He's in control of the natural disasters. He's in control of all those things. The only thing we're in control of is our attitude, isn't it? That's the only thing we're in control of. You look in the 2nd chapter there. Satan again is talking to God, and he says, yeah, but you limited me when I went after Job. He said, you didn't allow me to really get personal here. Now think about it. He took everything that he had and he took his children, but he didn't allow him to get personal. He said, you just let me touch him, and he'll curse you to your face. He'll curse you to your face. The Lord said unto Satan, behold, he is in thine hand, but save his life. Again, he put limitations. He told him, he said, you can do anything you want to him, but you can't kill him. You can do anything you want. Limitations. God is in complete control. And that's what we find here as we look through the 2nd chapter, ain't it? We see that he's lost everything that we think that we have to have in this world, and now he's lost his health. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord, and he smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his foot unto his crown. I don't know if any of you all have ever had a boil or not, but I got an infection many years ago, and it come up in boils. And I don't ever want it again. I wasn't covered in boils. I just had a few. But that was the most painful thing that I think I have. You have to take into context here all the things that I've been through. I've had knee replacements and everything else, but I think that boil was one of the most painful things that I've been through. Just a little old boil. It couldn't get no ease. You couldn't get away from it. And then you had to pick at it and get the core out of it so it'd heal. It was kind of miserable. So I sort of, in my mind, I can sort of understand what one boil on Job's body might do. But the Bible here doesn't say that he had one boil. It says that he was covered from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. In verse 8 there it says, and we find Job sitting in ashes with a piece of pottery, a piece of broken pottery, scraping those bowls to get the core out. Imagine where Job's at. Imagine the pain that Job is in at this point in time in his life. He's lost everything he's got except his wife. Everything. And the attitude that he faces all this with. In verse 9, we see his wife's attitude. It says, "Then said his wife unto him, Dost thou still retain thine integrity? Curse God and die." She was hurting too. You know, when we hurt, somebody around us hurts. She was hurting. When Satan came and he attacked Job and he took away all their goods and all their children, it didn't just affect Job. It affected her. She was in that same boat. When we have troubles and trials in life, it don't just affect us, it affects those around us. They're in that same boat. We see here that she had had enough. She wasn't enduring the pain. She wasn't enduring the things that were going on here with Job. She didn't have boils from the bottom of her feet to the top of her head, but she still felt for him. And she said, just get out of it. Get out of it. That's our mindset a lot of times, isn't it? We find ourselves in the center of one of these situations and we think, if I could just get out of it, if I could just get away. But I want you to think about Job's attitude here. Job here said to her, he says, but let me go back to chapter 1 first. We'll talk about Job's attitude there. In verse 20 it says, Then Job arose, he rent his mantle and shaved his head and fell down upon the ground and worshipped, and said, Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. You know, when all these things were taken away from him, Job was sad. Job was hurting, and it tells us that there. Job did everything that they normally done at this point in time in history to show that grief. And then it says that he worshiped. It said the Lord's given and the Lord's taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. He worshiped God. In verse 10, it's in chapter 2, it says, But he saith unto her, Thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh. What shall we receive good at the hand of God? And shall we not receive evil? In all this did not Job sin with his lips. So he looked at her and he said, What? Shall we receive all these blessings that we've received? And then curse God whenever we have a bad day? Now for Job, it was more than a bad day. For a lot of us, as we go through that suffering, it's more than a bad day. It's a long time. Miss Susie, 4 years. You know, a lot of others suffer a long time. We was talking with a friend there Friday, and he was talking about his aunt who had had a stroke and had been in a nursing home for 12 years. I feel like that's suffering for 12 years. You know, we don't know. We don't know what time may bring. But a lot of times as we think about it, that suffering doesn't make a bit of sense to us, does it? But we find Job here asking this question. When God's so good to us, should we not expect some bad things? How can we curse him if he's been so good? You know, suffering doesn't make sense. But in our minds, a lot of times, faith during that suffering doesn't make sense either, does it? How can we praise God when we're going through these trials, these hardships of life? Well, if we don't praise God, if we don't trust God, who are we going to? We're going to reject and run to this world? You know, it doesn't always make sense. But when you think about it, it's the only logical answer, isn't it, to that question. Do I not need to yield my life to the one that's in control of it here, that can take care of me here and in the hereafter, instead of trusting what's in this world? Job here, I think, teaches us to have that proper attitude. To live that life that's pleasing to God, no matter what. To worship God. To live for Him. Even when all those around us have said, I quit. I can't do it anymore. I just can't go forward. Job says, let's keep marching. Let's keep going. Let's keep doing the things that we need to do. Let's keep living that life that's pleasing to God. So I have to ask you this morning, what's your attitude? What's your attitude as we go through life and we face those trials and those tribulations and those challenges of life? Do we throw our hands up and say, I'm done. Can't take it anymore? Or do we say, God, I know that I'm nestled right in the palm of your hand. I'm right where you want me to be. See, that's what He wants, is for us to understand that no matter, He's in control. But we have to yield for Him to be in that control, don't we? We have to give our lives to Him. Have you done that today? Have you given your life to Him? If you would stand with me this morning.